Hello. So a while ago, I made a video called Fiber Optics Notes Part 2, but the audio quality was pretty poor. So I want to redo it and re-explain the concepts that I touched on in that video. But I also want to really embellish them and go into certain caveats that I've learned in between the time of that video till now, which was about I want to say a couple months back. So let's start here. The first thing that we need to address before we go into the what's and the whys of why it is that a fiber optic link is down and how to fix it, which we would just summarize as methodologies in theory and practice, is understanding the importance of documentation and communication. This is more important than your methodologies, and the reason why that's the case is because of the fact that if you don't properly document the steps that you've already taken or the notes that you've already seen or the conditions that you've already seen, and if you don't properly communicate those to other people or to your future self, who's not going to know what they did 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago, 3 weeks ago, or track systemic issues in a spreadsheet, or if you don't take notes, if you don't take that extra step, you're going to take 10 more to remediate that step you should have took a long time before. It's kind of like a self-imposed Swiss cheese method, and you'll run into it when it's so easy to see it in other people, but we do it way too often to ourselves, where we realize oh wow, if I just took notes on what exactly I did in language that I will understand in the future, um, I would have saved myself so much time in troubleshooting. And I found it I found this to be the truth as well. If you can publish your documentation to where everybody who's facing the issue can then look at it, they typically won't send you on wild goose chases of okay, I saw you did this, go do that. If you just assume that they're going to send you to go do that or test this or test that in the first place, you might as well do it and come to them with definitive results. Because if you come to them describing the steps that you've already taken, they might think, oh, okay, well, he doesn't necessarily know that he could also take the next step. And and you may have done it, but they don't know it. And it's so important because it's so um, missed on. And I guess there's some people that I've ran into in previous jobs where they think that they gain bonus points within their own psyche and their selves if they're able to do a job or a task or a role or fix something with the least amount of documentation as possible. It's kind of like the guy who wants to put together furniture without ever looking at the manual because for whatever reason it makes him feel smarter or more macho or or something like that. And that's just not the way that um, any sort of collaborative troubleshooting should be done. And it's not the way that you should do it to yourself, considering the fact that you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot with future confusion. So that's incredibly important to get out of the way first and foremost. So let's see here. But it also extends into establishing. I have my speakers notes right in front of me. It also extends into establishing common language that ought to be as specific as possible. For example, if you run into if you're troubleshooting something with somebody, right? Like they have a group meeting or they call you over and they're describing a problem that they're having, and you ask them, "Did you loop back that port?" They don't necessarily know what you're talking about because that port is too general of a statement. If you say, "Did you loop back the fiber?" Did you say, "Did you clean the fiber?" Did you say, "If you reseated the fiber?" It's still too general of a statement because they could say yes to you, assuming that you only mean the fiber, the port, and the optic that's right in front of them, instead of what you might mean, and that's did you clean and reseat every single endpoint, every single port, every single connection that this fiber could be ran to. Now I understand that this, as an introduction to the video, is a little too highbrow because I'm using terms like port, optic, fiber, reseat, resat, and it's not necessarily something that's going to click with someone that's just brand new to the industry. But this is definitely a note that I want to put first because it's important, and you can refer to back later when you then understand everything else that's in this video. For example, I say things like Some people, some people say, oh, the near side and the far side device. What does that mean? What does that mean? Because it's also like near and far are terms that are relative, right? Relative to what? Where I'm standing? Or are you talking about two ends of the link? Well, in that case, you should say A and Z or A and B, and that makes a whole lot more sense. But even if you say A and B and A and Z, if you don't clearly define which host name and which port is A and which host name and which port is B, it's not gonna. You're just gonna run into more and more confusion, and that level of frustration can be misinterpreted as hostility or insulting in nature, or I mean, you name it. And it's like this, all of this sort of like headbutting can be avoided if we just had established a common language. And sometimes, if you're the first guy to engage a sort of fix, you're the one who has to establish it. Or if you're a person that is being brought on to assist in a fix, you then have to establish it as well, so that way everyone can know what exactly you're talking to or talking about, and can start speaking the same language with everybody. Everyone is then having the same conversation, right? And that's all that communication really is. The more documentation, the better. You won't know what's tested or what happened 2 weeks later, and you don't want to be too vague. All right, let's go back to the actual like meat and potatoes of this, right? So typically, you're diagnosing a link because it's down, right? Or because there's not enough light traveling through it. And if you don't understand what I mean by that, you should check out my previous / latest video on fiber optic troubleshooting, right? So I'm not even going to go into like what light levels are and how to fix them, how to clean them. That's not what I'm trying to illustrate here. If you have like a light level -4, if you try to clean it and like go to -1, it might cause the test for the link to pass. Right? That's simple. What I'm touching on is let's see here. What I'm touching on is when a link is down, just down, and it's represented by something like a -40 or a -90. How do we troubleshoot this? Well, there's possible causes of a link being down. And the first thing that you need to determine, especially if you have command line access, is configuration. And the reason why we want to determine this first is because we don't necessarily want to enter the rabbit hole of physical testing if it's something as simple as the engineer who deployed this thing disabled the port, and therefore the link is down because one of the switches is not accepting traffic on that port. This is something that you can test before you even show up to the site, before you even show up to the device, before you even take your tools out, and before you test all the layer 1 of fiber. You know what I mean? Before you start saying, oh, the port on that switch is bad, you can tell, oh, actually it's not even turned on or not even enabled to take in traffic. And that's something that you can check from your desk. So ensuring that configuration is proper and conducive to healthy links is something that you need to do first and foremost. Now, if you're in a prod environment, most of the time that's not going to be the case, right? Most of the time configuration is going to be like airtight, and you're not going to have the room for error like you would see in some sort of lab environment, or or in some sort of like home office / small business environment / corporate campus environment, right? Like you'll see more of that, and like you'll see more of these config issues in that environment in addition to labs than you would in like a professional data center prod like with AWS, right? However, you might run into that if it's in both environments of lab, prod, and small corporate location where it's like cowboy shit running around and there's no processes. You might see that if it's a newly deployed device, and you might see that in every one of those environments, right? So if it's newly deployed, it may have some sort of configuration problems that stuck or weren't flashed correctly from the employer, or from the manufacturer or from the person who deployed it. I meant to say deployer and not employer. It's ridiculous. So aside from configuration, by the way, like I also want to touch on like two very like big points of configuration, right? One, enabled and disabled ports. We've already addressed that. The second one is actually very interesting, right? I ran into that quite recently. Profile versus installed optic, meaning that you can actually set on certain devices what kind of vendor it will accept, what kind of speeds it will accept, and what kind of type of optic it will accept, right? So if you have a port that says, I want 100 gig optics, and you put 400 gigs in them, the link will never come up. Or if you have a port that says, I want 100 gig optics, but I'll only use vendors like Eptolink, InnoLight, and Intel, and you put in a Finisar, it won't work. Sometimes you see weird stuff like that, and it's important to get that out of the way because it could be a very simple fix, or it could be something that you can escalate to and say, hey, I see that the profile is 400, or I see that the profile is 100, but you guys installed 400s. We can't really do anything here unless you want me to put in 400s, or we can order a bunch of 400s, or you can change the profiles and update every single switch to reflect what's installed if that's what you want. You see what I'm saying? Like this is something that's beyond layer one, despite it being kind of a layer one issue, but it's actually a config problem and something that I didn't think I would really see. But when I saw it and saw how systemic of an issue it can really be if you have a terrible deployment, it's a real snag. It really is a real snag. So, config can be a lot of things, but the most common ones that I've seen is enable, disabled, and profile mismatching and vendor mismatching. Okay, let's go into the rest of the possible causes. You might have a bad optic that's installed in the switch. You might have bad fiber that's installed in the network. Sometimes it's kinked or bound too tightly. Back on the point of bad optic, you might have a bad optic. Determine that it's a bad optic using your loopback testing and everything else. Get a new one, and that new optic could be DOA. So it's always important to have to test with known goods, right? Like if you know it's a bad optic, you replace it, and it's still down. You can't trust that the new item that you receive is necessarily foolproof and 100%. You always have to triple check. You always have to second guess and never trust anything that you see when it comes to fiber optics. Sometimes all you have to do is reseat it 10 times. Bad fiber could be kinked, bound too tightly. You could have a ferrule misalignment issue as well, which I'll document here in a second. Or you could eventually, and this is the worst one, when you have a bad port on the switch itself and it requires the entire switch to be replaced, or an engineer to go in and figure out why that port is not sending out traffic even if it's enabled. Let's see here. What else do I got? Okay, let's start with, so we've addressed that there are a couple possibilities of how something can go down within a link, but I think most people are visual learners, and I'm definitely a visual explainer. So let's kind of draw this out a bit. So we'll have our network device, right? And then you have a port. And typically a link is a link between those two devices. So you'll have one here, and then one here, right? But we ought to name these things, so that way we know what we're talking about when we say that port, this port. Let's increase the font. Switch A side, right? Which is going to be like switch, hostname, data center 2, or data center 1, and the port is port 1, right? And then you have, I don't know why I just did that. That's kind of strange. One is copy this. Cool. Oh, I see what happened. That's what I'm doing. Struggling, dude. Okay. And then you have switch B side, and then the host name is going to be SW hostname data center, well, it has to be a different switch, right? So it's going to be switch 2, data center 1. So it's the same data center, but this is switch 1 and that's switch 2, right? So there are 2 different devices. And maybe they're like within the same row or in completely different sides of the building or in completely different sides of the room, right? So how do we interconnect these 2 ports on these switches? Well, we'll have what's known as a optical transceiver, which converts digital data from the switch into light data, and that light data, and by the way, this obviously will be plugged into the port, but for illustrative purposes, that light data will then go through fiber. That fiber would then enter a patch panel, and on the other side of the patch panel is another port, right? And that port has another piece of fiber that comes all the way over to another patch panel, or another port, patch panel, port, and then connect to the optic on the other end, right? So now we have a connection between A side and B side on port 1, and then I also didn't define the port that's on the B side, port 2, right? So, or actually, because it's a completely different switch, it could also be port 1 on a different switch, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be the same or a different port. It's just whatever port that the layout of the topology of the network that was planned by an engineer is configured to. So port 2. Cool. Let's define our fiber as well. This is what's known as the short run or short fiber. This is the long run or long fiber, and this is also the short run. And this is important. Why do we have our fiber segmented? The reason why we have our fiber segmented is because of the fact that the most fiber optics can get kinked, bent, especially when you're moving optics aside, reinstalling equipment, opening and closing fiber cage doors. There's many reasons why a fiber would get damaged, or a piece of fiber would get damaged. So if this was all one connection, and there was a sort of kink or break or something like that to where light cannot transfer between these 2 devices, you would have to rerun the entire connection, right? And that's just ridiculous in terms of man hours and resources and time spent. Most of the time, the long run is going to be protected because it's going to be in a sort of fiber basket away from all the moving parts within a data center. Nobody's going to bump into the long run with their cart or kink it accidentally when they're shoving a new device into a rack. So the long run is the one that's least likely to be the cause of your fiber issue. Most of the time, it's going to be the short runs if it is fiber, right? And these short runs are easily replaceable because all you have to do, because most of the time the patch panel is right next to the switch device or the rack, all you have to do is then, boom, just run a short connection between here and that patch panel. And essentially, when you segment your fiber optic, when you segment your fiber runs, it's easily maintainable in the case of a failure, in the case of anything like that. And because we have our patch paneling, and by the way, you could have multiple, especially when switch A is in a building and switch B is in a completely different building, you could have multiple patch panels in between it, with ports here and here and here and here, and have like multiple segmentations in your long runs. You never know, right? So, but I like to keep it simple, and this is what I was experiencing when I was at AWS. Let's continue from here. I want to save this image to come back to later. Actually, Avatar console team here. There we go. Save. Three segments. Cool. So let's dissect this a little bit, right? So let's assume that The first step in troubleshooting is establishing what is known as a known good. When you establish a known good, you can then test the rest of the network with that known good. So let's say I'm like omnipotent and I know that the optic on this end is bad, right? Well, since the optic on this end is bad, the entire span of connectivity, whoa, what just happened? The entire span of connectivity um, on the link is bad. So because this optic is bad, the link is then down, right? So this whole link between this here, switch 2 hosting divs under 1 port 2 and switch 1 hosting divs under 1 port 1 is down because of this optic. But I don't know that yet, so how can I test it, right? What I can do is take what's known as a loopback device. LC fiber, here it is. A loopback device like this, and take this optic, right, and plug in the loopback device. And what this loopback device will do is it'll take the signal coming out of this switch and loop it back in itself. And switches are smart enough to know, one, when they're looped back, and two, they can detect the light coming back, which will then give you a up status on the switch. So then you would SSH into the switch or run some sort of command to test the status of this port 2 on the switch. Is it up when it's looped back? If it's up when it's looped back, we've established a known good. And that known good that we've established is that port 2 on switch 2 is good, right? And because we know that, we can then base the rest of our troubleshooting understanding that we can use this port as a testing device, right? So if we loop back this with this old optic, we know that port 2 on switch 2 is good, and that optic in switch 2, or I should say original optic in switch 2 is good, right? So you have two known goods. But I told you that this optic is bad. So then that means that this would never occur, right? Because this status wouldn't be up. Port 2 would not be up if you use this optic to loop back it. So if you were to just temporarily use an alternative optic and it turned up, then that means that port 2 on this one is good, but the original optic was good. That's not true at all. When you put in a new one, it's good. Now here's the thing. We've already identified a suspicious point, right? We know that original optic in switch 2 is faulty, right? And we have a known good that, and that known good is that port 2 is good because we used a temporary optic in port 2. But here's the thing, what about the rest of the link? Because the short run fiber could also be causing a down condition. Now most of the time, I'll give you this, right? Most of the time, you are going to only have one source of failure for your link, right? So if you find that this optic is the reason why it's down, when you replace it and test the whole link, it'll come up, right? But what you can do is, and this is like sort of like level 2 thinking here, is you can put a loopback on a new port here, find that known good, and while you're doing that, put a loopback on the fiber here, where signal is being sent back, right? So then you're testing two things. Loopback going to, which means signal is going to the other switch, going to switch 1, and you're also loop backing with new optic, or hold on, with original optic in switch 2, right? So you do that, this here will test that end, and this here will test what's originally here, right? I know there's so much on the screen right now, but think about what happened. When you loop back with the original optic, the result was that the link was, or the result was that the port on switch 2 was down, which means that the original optic or the port was bad. So then what did you do? You swapped with a new optic on switch 2, and it showed up. So on your second test, it showed up. So then you know down here that the original optic on switch 2 is faulty. But because you've ran a loopback, like I'm up here now, because you ran a loopback going back to switch 1, what you can do is then test switch 1. And you'll see if everything else is good, that the link is up on switch 1. The loopback is up on switch 1. Or I should be consistent in my imaging. What that means is the rest of the fiber, the rest of the optics, and the rest of the ports going to switch 1, the long run, the other short run, the port, and the optic are good and will result in up if you loop it. That's great. That's great news. So that means that the issue is on this side of the network, right? And we've already established that it's because of the fact that there's an originally bad optic. Now what you have to do is what's known as normalizing the network. And all normalizing is plugging in everything together so that way it looks like this. Just like how it was. But this time, you're going to have a new optic installed on switch 2 side. If you do that, and everything is up, the link is up, the connections are up, then you're done with your ticket, or you're done with that side of the ticket that says fix this link. So now you've fixed the connection between switch 2 hostname data center 1 port 2 and switch 1 hostname data center 1 port 1. Do you see the kind of methodology here? But when I'm talking about level 2 thinking is not just testing, because you want to be as efficient as possible and save as much time as you can with your testing. Level 1 thinking is this, right? Level 1 thinking is find known good, test with known good, right? Level 2 thinking is test as much as possible, document, find known good with original tests, right? Because your original test isn't just looping switch 2, it's also looping the rest of the network. And then once you establish that, you'll be able to use that known good to test the rest of the network. You feel me? So like level 1 thinking is just like, okay, I'm gonna put a loopback on switch 2 and see if that comes up. Well, you're gonna be there for fucking ever because you're gonna be loopbacking the whole network to try and find a known good, right? And you're not gonna, and if you're really if you're level 0, you're not documenting, you know. But level 2 thinking is like test as much as possible. So that turns into loopbacking, you know, this side of the network on this patch panel and that side of the network, and trying to find a known good. If you loop back, you know, the B side of the network and it shows bad, then you have a hint on thinking that on this side of the network is the issue. If you loop back the A side of the network and it comes up, congratulations, you've established a known good, right? You know that the fiber here is good, you know that the short run fiber is good, you know the optic is good, and you know the switch port is good. And can then use this known good to test everything else on the B side. By everything else, I mean you can test the fiber, the optic, and the port by then taking you know, this optic and placing it here, or you know, getting a new short run and rerunning the new short run. I mean, like before you want to replace things, you want to test them. You know what I mean? Like typically what I'll do is I will like prove that it's like the fiber, or prove that it's an optic and make it definitive, so that way I'm not like, you know, asking people to throw in new fiber for me, or you know, chasing down and ordering optics when I ended up not needing it, for example. So, you know, let's try an exercise here, right? So we have a so how do I quiz you without giving you the answer, right? So let's assume we're omnipotent and we see that the link between switch 1 hostname data center 1 port 1 and switch 2 hostname data center 1 port 2 is down. right? Right now it's down, which is why we're working on it. The actual issue is that the long run fiber is bad and everything else is good. How can we test it? You can pause the video and think about it. That's why it's like really important to have like things drawn out, either visually in your head or documented, or things like that. And you can see how many like failure points in documentation we can have if you say like, oh, I loop back the port. What the fuck does that mean? I loop back the patch panel. Okay, going where? You know what I mean? Like okay, did you loop back it this way or did you loop back it that way? Like what does that mean, right? So we know that it's the long, like we know that it's the long run, right? But we have to test and make sure and prove that's the case. Like how do we determine that like God knows that it's the long run, but we mortal beings don't know that, and we have to determine that this is the case. How can we prove it? So how I would approach this, or how I approach any one of these things, right, is I will just choose a patch panel, and I will loop it here and loop it there, okay? So my first test is going this way, and it's going to come up because everything on this side is good. My second test going that way is going to come down. It's going to come, oh, hold on, actually, I got to be consistent, My second test going that way, this is going to come up, right? And this is going to come down, right? And I'm gonna document them. Like I looped patch panel on switch B side going to switch A, and it came down. I looped patch panel going to switch B side host name, or actually, you know what? I'm not even gonna leave it to interpretation. This is exactly what I would say, right? I took a loop back and looped the fiber going to switch A side, and it showed down, right? I also sent a loop back, looping the switch B side of the network, and it showed up. You feel me? Dope. Cool. So we've established that this side of the network is good. I'm going to get real suspicious here, and I'm going to take my test and do the exact same thing, right? I'm going to take a loop back and loop back the fiber going that way. Or is that how I drew it? No, that's not how I drew it. Loop back the fiber going this way, and then I'm going to loop back the fiber going that way, right? This test should come up. And here's the thing that's going to make me think that it's the long fiber, right? This test should come down, because when I run are you up on this switch, it's going to show that it's down. But wait a second, when I loop it this way, it showed up. What happened? The only thing that happened was that I included the long fiber in the equation. So at this point, I have enough definitive evidence to know that it is the long fiber. And the reason why you can't say something like, okay, what if you just reseat everything, is because of the fact that I did. I did reseat everything. When I looped back this, what I'm really doing is taking this piece of fiber, let me zoom in. I'm taking this piece of fiber out and putting a loop back in the port. And then when I'm done with this test, I'm putting it back in. Therefore, I reseated the optic already. And most of the time, if you're going to do this, you're going to clean it anyway, right? Because you never know if that might actually fix the issue. So reseating everything didn't work, and it's actually a faulty long-run fiber. We have enough definitive evidence through our testing, through our documentation, for this to be the case. Right? The worst, let's try another exercise here, right? Let's say it's actually a faulty short run. How would you solve this issue? It's not the port, it's actually, like, God knows in his omnipotent ways that it's actually the short run. How do we mortals figure this out? Well, we don't know that it's actually, the issue is not actually here, right? So maybe we'll actually start here, or we'll get lucky and start here and have our test, done that way. So obviously, if I loop back this side of the network, it's going to come up, and if I loop back this side of the network, it's going to come what? Down, right? Okay, cool. Now I know that the issue is on this side of the network. It could be the long run. It could be this. It could be like everything that's encircled here. Dope. Cool. So now I'm going to focus my attention here, right? I'm going to then loop back the optic. I actually need a different color now. I'm going to then loop back pieces. All four failed, but I can still paint. That's great. I would then take the original optic, plug it back in, and loop back it. And if you do that, it's going to come up. That's weird. That means now we've established a known good that this switch is fine. Once we've done this, we know, like let's look at what we know. We know that the issue is on this side of the network, right? But we also know that the issue is not an optic or device problem. It's not a bad port on the switch. It's not a bad optic. So that way, so now we know that the issue is either the long run of the fiber or the short run of the fiber. At this point, what I would probably do is reseat the fiber here and normalize everything. So that way it looks like this, right? Once I normalize it, it should come up. The whole link should come up because we basically just tested that we're basically testing the reseating of fiber on this end. We've already reset the fiber on this end when we took the fiber out of the optic and put in our loopback, right? So we don't need to worry about that. We do need to reseat this end of it. And here's the thing, I've already told you that the short run fiber is kinked, damaged, and needs to be replaced. So when you reseat this, and then you normalize it, everything is connected to where it should be, and then you run the test for the entire link should still show down. It should still show down, right? So at that point, you need to do the cheapest option first, right? The cheapest option first is this. 1, take your loop back and loop this side of the fiber. 2, take your loop back and loop this side of the fiber. And then go this way, and then go that way. Now, some might say that you should have done this before you tested the optic, and they're kind of right. But at the same time, I've known, like if we're talking about the most likely problems to occur, it could be a bad optic, it could be a fiber. I mean, like sometimes it's just 50-50, man. It could be like 40%, 60% here and there. I've seen bad fiber almost as common as I've seen bad optics, right? So whatever you want to do first, whether it's testing the optic or testing the optic, loop backing the original optic into that port, or loop backing the fiber as we are doing now, it's up to your discretion on how you want to take it. It's actually the same point of efficiency. If we do this, what's going to happen? If we run the test on this guy, are you up? The signal is going to go through this fiber, get looped, and then come back, right? And it's going to show that the port is up. So now we know that the long run is good, the short, and we already knew that this side of the fiber is fine. This side of the link and this side of the network is okay. Now we're suspicious about this guy, right? So when we loop this dude, and by the way, we're doing this shit at the same time, right? When we loop this guy, it should go down. And this is how we know with the steps that I've just taken that it's actually a bad short run, because we've already established that the original optic and the port on the switch is perfectly fine. But when I loop back something that's perfectly fine, it comes down because the short run is bad. And at that point, you should run a temporary short run, normalize everything, and see if it comes up. And if it comes up, then you can take that temporary short run, unplug it, and then dress the fiber correctly. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see how this kind of like can get really hairy if you don't document and everything else? But like once you've established a good methodology, a good rhythm, and a good routine, you can test like literally fucking anything. And even if you have like multiple patch panels, you can kind of identify that like it's just like more segments of failure or possible failure for this to be the case. Now I want to like